And Cedric had just completed a passive house course in Calgary. And he came home and said, I have seen the future of design.
Yeah.
I have seen where I want us to go as a firm.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. You can also check out our Reimagined Buildings YouTube channel for some great inspiration for both building new or renovating. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. Matthew Cutler-Welsh here from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. And today we're joined again by Mary and Ilka. Zach and I, we caught up last week, but Mary and Ilka, you were also at the Passive House Network Conference. How was it for both of you real quick?
Yeah, for me, I really enjoyed the conference as usual. It's always great to see everyone. And I actually took another week to explore Colorado afterwards, which was really, really cool. I experienced a totally different climate that, high altitude and all of that. And then I actually had the chance to visit some national parks. And one of them was Mesa Verde. And I took a tour through the history of the built environment there. And what was really interesting is that the Pueblo people really early on actually started using passive house principles to build their homes. In particular, they went into the ground to take advantage of some of the insulating values of the earth, and they implemented some pretty sophisticated ventilation systems as well.
That's very, very cool. That reminds me of there's a place in Cooper Pedy in South Australia, which is excessively hot, and a lot of the housing there was for the miners built. Was in the ground for a similar reason, but in the opposite direction, to keep cool, using the earth as a bit of a buffer against that really harsh climate. I don't know what they did for ventilation there, but I remember visiting, and they certainly felt very pleasant to be in. So they must have figured out the ventilation there too.
And there's no flies in there.
True, which is a big problem everywhere else. Mary, how's it been for you?
The conference was great. I got to interview a bunch of people, so that was fun. One of whom was Jonathan Hines from Scotland, from Archetype. He mentioned the UK Passive House Trust conference, so I listened to a little bit of that. Yeah, it was great just to hear more about Scotland being on the verge of hopefully passing national legislation to require passive house or the Scottish equivalent, which of course there's the question what that's going to be, but for all new residential buildings. So that was exciting to hear about.
Yeah, I keep an eye on that one. It sounds like it hasn't got there yet. It sounds like they're still sort of trying to get that over the line. I'm not sure what the latest is on that. All right, and we've got a great interview to get into this week. Thank you to Mary and Ilka. But before we do that, Zach, we've got some people to thank.
We do indeed. So everything we do at Passive House Accelerator, including the podcast, comes thanks to generous support from our sponsors. So a big thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingwe Architects, Glavel, Minutair, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwool, Stoke Corp, and Zola Windows. Thanks to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Gradient, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, Proseco, and Source 2050. And a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Awesome. All right. I really enjoyed this conversation, Mary and Ilka, you had with Cedric and Mary Burgers. I think they do a pretty good intro for themselves. So should we jump straight in?
Welcome, Cedric Burgers and Mary Burgers, to the Passive House Accelerator podcast. And Cedric is principal of Burgers Architecture and an accredited Passive House designer. And Mary is the communications and creative director of the firm.
Thank you for having us.
Can each of you just tell us a little bit about your role in the firm and what you do and how long the firm has been around?
Right. So Burgers, my parents came from Holland in the 1960s. They came to Canada via New York and a bunch of other American cities. And my dad was he was an architect and planner in Delft. He had gone to school in Delft in Holland, and my mom had been working as a development consultant. And it was at a time when Holland was just very war-torn still, and there was not a lot of future. So they decided to pack up. And in a nutshell, they kind of skipped across North America looking for the right place to land and settled on the west coast of Canada. Because it was sort of a mild climate and they could see themselves as raising a family here. So they unfortunately, Holland ended up discovering oil in the North Sea, and then it started to do extremely well. And so they missed out on all of that wealth and prosperity that came to their home country because they left. But they came here, and it was a wonderful idea because they loved it here. So my dad passed away in 2017. He started, my mom is still around. She still works in the firm, and she is an interior designer now. They started, they partnered with a few other architects when coming to Canada, but then eventually opened up their own firm and essentially built a lot of houses for themselves and for other clients, and did a few industrial projects. And so I grew up in that milieu. I grew up in the milieu of construction. They moved 14 times to 14 new houses when I grew up. So it was on average every 2 years, they built another house and flipped and sold and flipped and sold. And it was because there was a tax benefit to do that. You didn't have any income tax on your principal residence. So they were able to make a living that way. But also the fast pace and rapid pace of construction and design, and the meant that we were constantly involved in it as kids, and dinner table conversations were all about design. They were with a sketch paper on the table and pens, and pick up your pen and describe for me what it is that you're thinking. What are you doing? And that sort of was inherent in all our conversations. And so it made you think on your feet, made you draw in front of other people. No matter how poorly you thought you drew, at least you had to describe something. So anyway, long story short, that was how the firm was started. And then I took over essentially in the late 2000s when my dad had a stroke, picked it up where he left off. And I'd had the benefit of about 10 years of working with him and learning the European way of designing. I went to school in North America. I went to UBC, but I learned how to design from him, and have carried on the firm ever since then. And we've done pretty well. We've got about 30 projects on the go at any one point in time, and we have our own construction company because of I just love construction, so we decided to keep doing that. And we became really. One of the things that I learned from doing my thesis at school was a real solid interest in environmental architecture. So, and then that started with my thesis project and then working on projects that involved water and energy and so forth. But it was kind of haphazard. It wasn't really focused. And then I started to get involved in passive home design around 2015, and it just clicked for me. It made everything make sense, and so it sort of synthesized all the ways that we wanted to think about things. And so when Mary and I met, We built a couple houses together.
No, we did one renovation. We did 2 renos together.
Yeah.
And then I was pregnant with our second daughter, and Cedric had just completed a passive house course in Calgary. And he came home and said, I have seen the future of design.
Yeah.
I have seen where I want us to go as a firm. And I think we should sink our teeth into this and build a passive house. And I sat there staring at him with a newborn on my lap saying, like, now you want to do this? And I guess it's sort of the magic to our relationship. We didn't wait. We just put that in motion and sold the home we had actually just finished.
Yeah.
And found a property, and within 18 months of that initial conversation had our permits.
Yeah.
And started construction.
Yeah.
And it was everything. It was the future going forward, and it was us taking that huge leap for ourselves, but also in that whole, like, if we build it, they will come.
Yeah.
Well, we really, really hope they come, and they have.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So how about your background, Mary? Like, do you have background in architecture, and specifically European architecture as well, so that you could see the passive house approach right away?
Well, my background is European. My parents were both Greek immigrants, and comparably, I grew up in a very opinionated home. My parents were also entrepreneurs, so that energy matching was there. My my background has always been in design. I had a BA in communications, which came naturally to a Greek girl who doesn't ever stop talking. And then I went into graphic design and practiced that for a while. And then I found my niche in interior design. I went back to school for that in my early 30s. And then Cedric and I started working together on projects, and it was a natural fit.
Yeah.
And we both have that very crisp mentality of our aesthetic and our yearning for purity in design and architecture, and not fussing around with unnecessary details. It's funny how you say like a European sensibility. And for me, that feels very much like clear thinking. And are we allowed to say we're clear thinkers, or can only other people describe us
I don't know.
as clear thinkers?
I think you already said it.
Anyways, we're there. We've committed to that now.
Well, I think looking at your website and your projects, I definitely see that you're clear thinkers. Your design approach is very clean and straightforward, and it's pretty amazing. So, and what I also noticed is that there's a lot of connection between indoors and outdoors.
Yep.
I was curious, going through the passive house training and looking at your project or your high design through a passive house lens, did that change your design approach at all? Because sometimes this indoor outdoor connection can be a little bit difficult to express if you don't have members going from the inside to the outside directly, trying to avoid thermal bridging.
Yeah. Can I take a stab at answering that?
Yes, of course.
So when I started to go back to Europe and go to Germany and go to some of the passive house conferences, and I got really infatuated with it as an idea. And when I came back home, I said to Mary, we're going to do this. And I started to do the design work. So I worked on it for 3 months on our home. And Mary's like, well, what have you got? What have you got? And I said, just wait. I'm going to get this. I'll show it to you when it's ready. So finally it was ready. And I said, this is the perfect passive house. It was a square box in the middle of a site with south-facing windows and minimal volume to surface area ratio. And I said, this is what we have to build. And can
I say what my response was? I think my exact words were, I need to hire another architect. So So very diplomatically, you went back to the drawing board.
No, I did.
You did.
Yeah, I did. I said, okay, before you hire another architect, give me 2 hours and I'll come up with something. As I said, what designs in the past have you liked? And she said, well, you did a design down the road here that had a beautiful view and it was a courtyard house. And I like that one. Okay. If you're going to like, that's a nice house.
And also this property that we purchased is so magnificent because it has a creek that runs all the way down the side of the property.
Yeah.
And when you stand there, you hear that rush of the water, and we're surrounded by these old growth trees. And that original design didn't embrace any of that. It just sat like almost like a physical calculation of what a passive house should be, not accounting for this incredible West Coast environment. So I asked you if we could take into account that there's told you in a very stern way that it would be lovely if we could incorporate nature that was around us.
Yeah.
So went back and came up with this.
So no, it wasn't that. So I said, okay, let's totally change our course here. Forget about passive house. Just stop it with that, because it's no good to design and build a home that you don't like and you don't want to live in. So let's do something that you like. Mm-hmm. So we worked on really making the design work. It was a big L-shaped house with lots of different levels and big overhangs and all the things that were a disaster from the the PHPP thermal bridging and a surface area perspective. It was just is a disaster. So, and then it had tons of north facing windows. And then finally Mary says, okay, that's the house I like. I said, okay. And so I had at this point in time abandoned, trying to make a passive house work. I kind of had given up on it. And then it sort of starts to gnaw at me. Like you can't give up on your principles just because you want to live a certain way. So how can we make the house work? And so
and be beautiful.
Yeah. So I had a whole bunch of very early mornings before work, and because I have a day job too, I can't just design our house. I have to actually work on other people's projects. So I got up early on Saturdays, some Saturday mornings, and I started putting the home into the PHPP and manually and crunching the numbers. And when I got to the bottom of it, it wasn't terrible. I think we were sitting at around 21 or 25 or something like that. And I said, okay, that's kilowatt hours per meter squared annually. So I said, okay, well, what happens if I just increase some of the wall thicknesses and focus on insulation? What if I improve R values? What happens if I change the windows out? And slowly over a period of time, it started to kind of pull together. Mm-hmm. And I got down to, I think, 14 kilowatt hours per meter squared annually. And it took a ton of work. So we had to work on every single piece of the building, from the plumbing stacks to the vents to the drainage to the type of HRV we're using, and tweak every single tiny dial. And the house itself stayed pretty much intact. We didn't have to change much. But by tweaking all of those variables, we made it work. Mm-hmm. And and then built it. So it was a lesson. I think the big lesson was that design has to come first, and we cannot put on an engineering hat and be engineers when we design homes or buildings. In fact, any building, it has to be design first, performance second, because there's no point in having a high performance home that isn't comfortable and people don't want to live in. So that was by changing the approach, reversing it. I know it sounds obvious, but when you're excited about something, you want to make it the primary driver, and it was a lesson that we can't make it the primary driver. It has to be secondary. It can be a very important factor. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I think that's sort of more or less described. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so true though that as a designer, you can't just abandon all your design integrity, right? Because your first goal as an architect is for the client to be happy where they live, right? You can't just kind of totally abandon that. And I think that's what's so great about passive house compared to solar passive, which a lot of people still get confused, right? So passive house, you have so much more leeway, especially through the energy modeling part. There are so many levers that you have to play with that at the end, you can really make very, very informed decisions and still get to certification, even if you think, at first view, maybe it's not like the perfect orientation or the perfect layout. So I think that's really insightful that you went through this process and that it worked out at the end.
The lesson that I draw from that story is that you can have your design aesthetics and your principles, your sustainability principles united. They don't have to fight each other, because as Ilka was saying, the PHPP can really help you get there.
Yeah, it's an amazing tool. It took me a few tries, a few houses to get it right. But the thing that I think that's interesting, though, is once you start to really knuckle down on the PHPP, it starts to describe a different type of language for design. So, once, the thickness of walls is an obvious thing, right? We always go for super thin, everything super thin, but having thicker walls with more mass in them is a different aesthetic, and how to deal with that aesthetic is interesting. The other thing is that all external balconies have to be self-supporting, and so we did that by having by sort of really making things self-supporting on the outside and having very large concrete pillars that support the big overhangs, and it has become, instead of trying to hide things, it's sort of a way of celebrating the fact that structure either has to be inside or outside, can't be in the wall where they form thermal bridges. And once we start to develop that design language, it becomes in itself a different way of looking at buildings. Like if you look at a Tesla, they have flat floors and low battery packs and flat wheels on the outside and skinnier tires. Well, all of that is a new way of thinking about a car that people at first are maybe like, oh, that's weird looking. But after a while, it becomes a new aesthetic that becomes aspirational for people.
So this actually really answers my previous question. So you're basically saying looking at your design through a passive house lens definitely has changed your design aesthetics.
Yes. Yeah. Because before we were having great big steel beams that cantilevered roofs, all over the place, and I thought that was really cool. And then the beams would sweat, and you'd have rust issues, and so we don't do that anymore. And also, it's a massive thermal bridge, but it was the way that we designed before. And now we can't do that anymore. But how do we get that same drama out of our designs, and how do we create big overhang, unsupported cantilevered spaces, right? Like that's what people want, especially on the West Coast. We want large covered outdoor spaces.
Yes.
Yeah.
And drama.
And drama. Beauty.
And beauty.
Yeah. Yes.
I think when we started to see the framing come in, is when I got the most excited, because it's one thing to look at plans and think, okay, I know you need this type of window system here, and I know that you need this kind of mechanical or concrete, and then when we started walking through the home and understanding how our family would move in the spaces and how intuitive it felt, was when it really clicked for me.
Yeah. There's
no lack of familial feeling in such a high-tech home.
Yeah. Oh, super cozy. I mean, one of the things, Mary, maybe you could touch on this, but there was obviously a big shift, because we went passive, but we also cut gas off completely. And the two are not necessarily connected, but we decided to not have any gas lines, and they're very common in Vancouver to have. Everyone has gas lines for their fireplaces and their furnaces and their hot water heaters and their stoves and yada 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 yada, barbecues. It's all powered by gas, and so to actually cut the gas off at the street and say no, we're not going to bring that onto the property. We're talking about natural gas here. Is kind of a bold move because it precludes us from having gas stoves, and so that was. Maybe you want to talk about that too, because that's part of the design language.
It is. It's definitely an aesthetic. I think there's definitely a client or a type of chef who really wants to cook with gas, whether they think it's a different, better way of cooking, or sometimes it's just an aesthetic. They like those round red wolf knobs in the kitchen. I was not opposed at all to cooking with induction because having been in Greece and traveled through Europe, I had been in many a kitchen cooking induction, and there is no sacrifice at all in the type of meal preparation or food that comes out of an electric oven or induction. And I would say that is something that most clients would find challenging. They're very attached to cooking with gas.
Yeah.
And so when that comes up, the first thing I do is say, why don't you come over and let me cook for you? And, and once they're here and they are part of the kitchen environment and there's food coming out and there's wine and there's kids running around, it becomes instantly cozy. And I use the word familial so much because it doesn't sacrifice any of that feeling of like being home.
Yeah.
And then it's very quickly forgotten that gas would change the kitchen environment or the way you cook and prep food.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is a bold move to go all electric, almost like going from a car that uses gas to an all electric car, making that jump. And yet, it's a move that we all need to make eventually. And it's great that you're making that choice and leading that. When was your house finished?
Oh, we finished, I would say, 2-3 years ago?
Yeah, 3 years ago.
Yeah, 3 years ago. And moved in probably a little bit earlier than we should have moved in. We didn't have a patio. There was no patio pavers. And anyway, we moved.
We were our own clients.
We were our own clients. Yeah.
So we wouldn't have recommended this to a office client, but for ourselves, we were way too excited. And And it was, it's great. I mean, some of the lessons we've learned since then, there's lots of ways to fine tune it. We have since put solar panels on the roof, and so it's designed to be net zero. So we've got 32 solar panels on our roof that will compensate for the electricity consumption. So that was that should have been designed into the home in the first place. But adding it on afterwards was cumbersome and difficult. So we should have thought about that. But at the time, we just wanted to get it done and get moved in. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you're not doing the 2-year rhythm of selling the house after 2 years and building new.
No.
No.
Before my father passed away, he actually spliced off of his own very established fig tree at his own home. And he spliced a fig tree for us to plant here at the house. And that was my insurance policy. I said, Cedric, once this goes in, I'm not leaving ever.
Yeah.
And the fig tree is against a beautiful concrete wall that gets lots of sun. And I mean, this is the other part we're not really talking about yet with our home, is that the big decision to build passive and to have this low impact way of sustainable living, like that big macro decision has influenced so many micro decisions now. And I think it's almost the opposite of how you would think you would build up to a big decision. And So from this big one, we were like, wow, we should be eating a little more from our garden. We should be maybe planting a little bit more food and trying to live a little bit more off our own land.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was the start of that now. We've got 5 or 6 beds that produce all sorts of lettuces and kales and onions, and it's like a full producing garden. And then we planted a small orchard of plum and apple trees. So it's really coming together in terms of like that whole holistic kind of way of living here.
Yeah. I think Mary's absolutely right. Once you make a big decision to do this, you start to look at all the other ways in which you might not be kind of, you're not acting in alignment with your values, really. And so, you start to kind of edit and change so many other ways in which you're behaving. And I mean, we have young children, so we want to be role models and not leave them with a world that is lesser than what we entered into. And I think we're well on our way to doing that. We're heaping a pile of problems on the next generation by persisting with our inefficiencies and our huge consumption habits. So anyway, that's my philosophy on the issue. But I think
we're just trying to practice what we preach to our own children.
That's it.
We can't change much else, actually. But
that's actually a good point. You mentioned being a role model. Do you see being a role model for other clients as well? I mean, that's probably the biggest way of explaining to clients, why they should be building a passive house.
Yeah. I think it's a buzzword now, which is I'm very grateful for. For many years, Ilka, I struggled with the LEED approach to environmental and sustainable design. The LEED is a certification program. I'm sure you've heard of it, but it was always a really, really tough sell. And I got LEED certified as a designer, and it became sort of this collection of little things like, how close are you to a bus stop? What do you have low VOC paints in your home? Do you, like energy consumption was just one of many things. And that checklist style of design, it never really sat well with clients. They're like, well, by doing that, can I save money by not doing those things? And of course, the answer is yes, you can save some money. Well, I'm going to save some money and I'm going to buy more furniture or buy a big screen TV. Why would I do those things? It was a really tough sell. And with Passive House, it's so straightforward. It's just one number, essentially. That's the way I sell it to clients. And it's the right thing to do. And they have heard of it through channels. They understand it. They understand it's a super rigorous, high performance criteria. And they sell themselves naturally on it. So I don't really have to do all that much. And
our clients are, I think, oftentimes far more sophisticated and well-traveled and have seen examples of it while they've been away. Like, they are articulate, they're educated, they're curious, and they're bold risk takers.
Yeah.
They don't see it as a sacrifice. They see it as a jump forward.
Yeah. And the other part of this is our trades. If they're good trades, they pile on too. They're like, oh, this is cool. I've heard of that. I want to get certified. I'm going to go get certified so I can work on your projects with you. Electricians and plumbers and the framers, they all want to learn how to do this. And the trades courses are fairly straightforward. And before you know it, you've got an entire team that is all helping to pull the weight. And it's not just us as architects. The whole team is pulling the weight, including the clients. They are the ones that are pushing it forward. And so it's been absolutely wonderful. It's a complete reversal from when I was trying so hard with LEED and other things. It's just something that's sort of self-evident and
you
clear.
become much more credible when you've done it for yourself too, I think.
Yeah. Right. There's that too. So we have them over. We have them over for some pizza on a Friday night, and they're like, "I like your house.
Yeah.
Like it's energy neutral." What? What?
And if they resist, we just pour more wine until we totally convince them.
We have a nice wines.
That's a really good strategy.
Yeah, thank you. We just write that off as marketing expense.
Yeah.
That's going one step above and beyond the usual communications.
Yes. No, I've just given away my secret handbook. There you go.
Little coercion. Yeah. But it should really be fun for clients. And when they get it, they feel like they're part of the future. And I think that everybody has an inherent need to feel like they're part of something that is future forward. They're part of the change that is going to make a difference. I think with other programs, they never felt like they were part of a change that was going to make a difference. They felt like it was just like a proclamation that you were a good person, but people don't really inherently care about that. But when they feel truly like this is the change that is going to make things happen.
And it's incentivized by the city now.
Oh, yes. Well, there's that too.
I mean, we should talk about that.
There's that too.
It's not just, being strong of conviction and having wonderful morals. The city of Vancouver, as most suburbs now, are rewarding this type of building program. So there's incentives available that were not before, and it will be the standard in how many years? I mean,
well, according to our we have this thing called a step code where we're stepping from like low performance to passive house essentially, and it was supposed to be a 7 or 8 year program. Step 6 is a passive standard, and step 2 was what it was a couple of years ago, code built minimum. And we're slowly ramping up there in British Columbia, but a lot of municipalities have accelerated that and are requiring step 5 already, or a low carbon step 3, they call it. But anyways, this is essentially a step 5, which is near passive. It's not passive certified, but it's near passive. And if you achieve that on your own volition, they incentivize it by giving density bonuses, so floor area bonuses, height bonuses, and setback bonuses. So setback relaxations, pardon me. So that you get smaller setbacks, which accommodates for some insulation, but it's actually accommodates for a bigger house too. So the city of Vancouver has been incredible this way. There's also bonuses that they give. You get premium billing in their approvals process. So you go right to the front of the line.
Which is huge because that can often be a year and a half of waiting. Yeah. So they really are doing everything.
That's a great incentive.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you look at all these things, and we have some houses in Vancouver where we have, some of them have 16-foot ceilings because we translated the floor area density bonuses into extra height, interior height. And so you have these incredible volumes and height in houses that would normally have just a mandatory sort of 9-foot ceiling or 8-foot ceiling. And they're dramatically different looking homes. And this is kind of the thing that's really exciting when we show people some of those Vancouver houses. They say, well, that's what you can build now. That's a code built house. And this is what a passive house looks like. They see, oh, that's the difference. Look at how beautiful that is. That's a very substantial looking, incredible looking, beautiful high volume, large glass.
And an architectural statement.
Yeah. So I think, when people see that difference, it's sort of like, well, yeah, if I can get all of that. The trick is to do it for the correct price, of course, and that's a different matter. But right now, I'm thankful that our clients are willing to pay a bit of a premium to get a substantially different home, and we're working on bringing the costing down as we go through this, as we find different ways of building. So we've moved away from stick framing, which is 2x4s, to prefabrication now, and we're working with a CLT manufacturer, cross-laminated timber manufacturers, to bring in prefabricated building panels. And so that, again, will start to bring the pricing down and shorten the schedule of construction, which is another factor that we don't really talk about very much, is that the shorter the construction schedule, the sooner you can move in, the sooner you can arrange, like, your financing, everything gets less expensive. So we're trying to find ways in which to really, really make it work. One of the challenges that we have on the West Coast is that we don't really have a lot of cross-laminated timber or glue lam manufacturers, and we know that using wood is preferable to using concrete and steel. So we're trying to do everything as much as possible out of wood. But so that's the next journey that we're going on now, is to look at the life cycle analysis of the materials that go into our homes, to see their carbon footprint, because if that's the natural kind of reaction that a lot of people have as well. Great. You're building a high performance house, but it took you so much extra energy, and your carbon footprint to build the house is so much bigger than were you to have built a simpler code built house. And so that although it's not correct, there's lots of reasons why I can say, well, that is not true because of the lifespan of the house. It is a concern that we have to start thinking, in addition to all of that efficiency, start thinking about the life cycle of the materials that we're using. And so that's our next journey. And we're excited to start that one. And we have pretty clever staff who are working with building integrated management modeling, and they're using Revit to model life cycle analysis of our buildings. So that's pretty cool.
Speaking of material choices, we wanted to ask you, Mary, how much is that sort of the indoor air quality impacts of the material choices that you make? Because you're responsible for the interior design. Could you talk about that?
Yes. For this project, it was fairly straightforward. We used a concrete floor on the main and second floor. So that eliminated any necessary hardwood floor choices or tiling. It was concrete that we went with. There's a lot of wall area that is also concrete. So I was left with a little bit of drywall and a lot of windows. So this design in particular was very straightforward. I didn't have to add too much. I spent a lot of time considering the kitchen, as it really is like the center of our entire main floor. But again, with that decision, it was to keep it as simple as possible, because these sliding doors open up entirely on this side of the house to the creek and to the woods, and that background is like a revolving art installation with like the different seasons, and there's these big trees. So I didn't have to make any hard decisions on the interiors.
Well, appliances for sure.
Well, the appliances, that was all straightforward. We went with electric wall ovens and an induction range.
Yeah.
And
fireplace.
And the fireplace.
You want to talk about that fireplace? Yeah. So one of the things that we just couldn't live without, or Mary didn't want to live without, was a fireplace. And so, of course, you know that fireplaces are not like traditional fireplaces, a giant hole that sucks air and sucks out all the warm air and replaces it with cold air inside your house. And they're not great they're terrible at heating houses. And so, because this home has no active heating system, we wanted to have something for some of the colder days, because it can get down to about minus 10 degrees Celsius in Vancouver in the middle of winter. So we wanted to have something that could could give us a little boost of heat if we needed it as an emergency. So we went with a Zender, not a Zender, pardon me, a Stuve fireplace, and it's a not really a fireplace. It's a wood burning. It's a wood burning stove.
Yes.
And it really, it's an amazing thing because it has its own combustion air source from an exterior, and then all the effluent, of course, goes up a chimney. But it's a completely insulated, self-contained thing, and when it doesn't, we did all our air blower door tests with it in place, and it's when it's shut down, it is shut down. There's no air leakage whatsoever. And so that was a really interesting thing to kind of put that into the mix too, to have a big fireplace, and it's large and it's beautiful. But that was something that we had to really think hard about how to get that to work.
So you said you don't have an active heating system, so you don't have any heat at all. It's just through solar gains and internal gains. Wow.
Yeah, we have no active heating system. We don't have radiant floors except for in the bathrooms. We have electric radiant heat in the bathroom, and we have an inline post heater on our HRV that just basically boosts the incoming air when it's really cold up to 21 or 25 degrees Celsius. So that's basically, it's, a box about this big with a shoebox size box that preheats or post heats the air coming from the HRV. I did put some electric radiant or electric baseboard heats in a couple of bedrooms on the south side that are a little bit more isolated. It gets really cold in one bedroom. So after living here for a year, I found that the bedroom above us here got quite chilly. So we put a little radiant heater in there, and
that was enough.
And that's enough. Yeah, no, it stays 21 degrees Celsius as long as we shut the doors. So I get a little annoyed with my kids when they rush out of the house and forget to close the door, the mudroom door or the garage door on a cold day, and it just stays open. And then all of a sudden the house goes down, like it drops 5 degrees Celsius. I'm like, why is it so cold in the house? And it scared me at first, the first year we were here, because it was so cold on some days. And I was like, what is happening? This is not good. And then we realized that someone left a door open, and that's all it takes. You got to be careful. Yeah.
Sometimes they don't make their beds, but they're very diligent about closing doors. So we just have to count our blessings as parents.
Yeah.
So they're learning, right? Just how you learned growing up, how to design and communicate your designs, which is actually very apparent on your website as well. I noticed that each design has a beautiful watercolor rendering.
Oh yeah.
That comes with it. So is that how you communicate your designs to your clients as well? Or is that more just just exploring?
Oh, it's part of the concept design process. So right in the early stages of the design work, I produce sketches and just to communicate the kind of the design intent. So a lot of work is done by hand because it's quick, and they're just kind of vignettes to show the client what the concept is and what we're aspiring to do with it. And so that's what the purpose of those are. And oftentimes they end up being quite like the final design. Sometimes they're quite different, but yeah.
It's enough though to get that excitement and the imagination going.
Yeah.
Without it looking like a final product.
Yeah. No, they're beautiful. And I encourage all the listeners to check out your website and look at those beautiful drawings and designs. And thank you so much for talking to us. This was really exciting.
Yes, we really appreciate your time here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this has been really fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Ilka. A pleasure. Yes.
Yeah. And I have to say, I want to say thank you to both of you for taking on this this task of broadcasting to the world this hugely important thing, because it's the more people hear about it, the more people are likely to do something to make a good change. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think I want to say thank you for actually looking at really nice design through a Passive House lens, and also showcasing Passive House about your designs. I think that's something that maybe some people don't realize that that's possible. Maybe they do think that Passive House restricts you in any way design wise. So I think what you do is just beautiful, and thank you for that.
Yeah, no, that's a myth that we have to dispel. It is not, it's just a tool. And it actually opens up a whole new world, like electric cars have too. So it's just a matter of time. And the sooner we do it, the better.
And I invite both of you to actually come and have a meal here.
Come on over and drink some wine.
And experience it the way I would love for you to experience it.
I will.
And that was Cedric and Mary Burgers of Burgers Architecture, based in British Columbia, and looks like a beautiful part of the world. I just checked out some of their photos from their website, but also they got some beautiful images on their Instagram page as well. Let's start with you, Ilka. What was sort of main takeaways for you?
So coming from an architecture background, I was really interested in how they have a very established design aesthetic. I mean, they both, or at least Cedric grew up with, in an architecture family, moving every two years and designing new houses all the time. So they already had a very established design perspective, so to say. And then I thought it was really interesting to now change basically the lens that you look through into a Passive House lens, and just reconsidering your design decisions and integrating everything that makes a Passive House work, instead of, aesthetics and Passive House principles work against each other. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, Cedric used that term lens. I heard it a few times, and it really kind of describes, I think, change of perspective but still wanting that desire for the aesthetic, but changing what that aesthetic maybe means when you have to include things like thicker walls, how you deal with overhangs, which obviously add more surface areas, but still seem to be a quite a important feature that they try to include in what Mary described as the drama of their style and their beauty. So yeah, I thought that was really an interesting progression that Cedric obviously went through, from wanting to please his own family with their own home, but also to make it perform really well. Mary, what did you think?
Well, it was a great discussion about getting into Passive House and the steps that somebody who's been working in architecture for a while goes through when integrating Passive House into their practice. So that was something, but also the just the advantages of operating in Vancouver, where the code gives a Passive House home so many advantages. The skipping to the front of the line for permitting is a huge deal. The setback changes, the bonuses, all those make his clients much more enthusiastic about Passive House, and how great that is.
Yeah. I'm definitely picked up on that, about the clients being enthusiastic, but also the contractors as well. I love hearing stories about builders and tradespeople coming onto a Passive House building site, maybe being a little bit apprehensive to start with, but then when they learn about what they're doing, really getting into it and feeling excited that they're part of something. That Mary and Cedric both said a couple of times, they referred to the sense of feeling part of a change and being excited by that. right at the start, I think Mary said that it was a bit of a leap of faith that they would build it and hope that they would come in terms of moving in that direction of Passive House as a practice. And it seems that has proven to be the case, that they have found the demand at that higher end. These are beautiful homes. They're not going to be in everyone's price range for sure, but to be able to influence that market, I think, is still a really relevant thing and a very important goal, because it helps shift all parts. We got to shift all parts of the market. Zach, what about you?
I was really struck by a couple of things. One was Cedric, near the beginning of the conversation, referred to Passive House as making everything make sense to him, which is a theme that I think we've heard many times. My first Passive House mentor, Sam Hagerman, called it the unified field theory of construction for him, that, when he first encountered it, it was like, oh, now all these things that sort of I was intuiting and that are coming together. And so I that struck me about kind of Cedric's perspective. And then also, I felt like the story that Cedric and Mary told about their own house was almost like a fable of, how Passive House design and high design can come together. With that, initially, it was just the Bach engineered cube, and that didn't work. And then it was that didn't work, so let's go and just do the house we want. And then figure out afterward if you can make that work as a Passive House, and they did accomplish that. And then the kind of the third step was that the evolution of their aesthetic and some of the design moves that they're making, incorporating the thicker walls, avoiding steel girders piercing through envelopes and all that. So I thought that was a kind of a very clear kind of progression that they described that I think is instructive for anyone who is thinking about how to do great design and Passive House at the same time. It's
almost the opposite of what we tend to tell people to say, start with the end in mind from a performance point of view, or it's when you start with a design and then try and add things to it to make it a Passive House. That's when it becomes expensive and problematic, which is kind of that process that both Cedric and Mary, I think, were battling with, is to say, well, we want this aesthetic. We want these things that we know as architects, as professional architects, about the flow and connecting with the natural environment and making the most of the stream and the view. But we also want it to be healthy and energy efficient on the inside. And I think they have the luxury as architects and as being their own clients of having quite a detailed integrative design process. So I guess the challenge to take that to the rest of the industry is to figure out how to do that in an efficient and effective way, where you're doing those two things for clients, making homes that do respond to their surroundings and fit in nicely, but and are attractive, beautiful places to be in, at the same time as working really well. I think it brings up a number of issues around the ideal order of doing things and the ideal priority of things. It's something I've been thinking about recently is this idea of efficiency first. And in the context of a lot of houses that I see, I'm playing around with this idea of efficiency second, with effectiveness being first. But that's more in the context of the bare minimum of some of our houses just simply aren't doing the bare minimum. They're not doing the basics of looking after people properly. So the houses need to be effective and then efficient, and also beautiful and cost effective and all these other things. So it's not an easy it's not an easy puzzle. You got all these challenging different parameters that you got to juggle. I thought it was a really great question. The other thing I just wanted to pick up from a technical point of view is Cedric's discussion there, which you mentioned, Zach, as well, about structure and poking through the walls, because something else I'm thinking about quite a lot at the moment is balconies, and they did mention about they really like overhangs and cantilevered parts of buildings, and it's a problem when you try and poke the structure from the inside to the outside. And I quite like that concept of, I think Cedric said that structure should be either fully inside or fully outside. Problems occur when you try and poke part of the structure through the envelope, and I think that's a really good principle to think about in the design process.
Well, I would like to just touch back onto the beauty part real quick, because there is if you look at the Living Building Challenge certification, there's actually one pedal that is beauty, right? So I feel like it is part of sustainability, because you're not going to take care of a building or your home if you don't love it, right? So I think they do have a good point with making it really what the clients want, because that's what makes them, take care of their home.
Yeah, good point.
And for me, I thought it was interesting that they sort of, in their home design, embodied the steps to try and go from energy efficiency first to electrify everything to add renewables where as much as possible. I mean, they were sort of following the trajectory of how to have a climate conscious building.
And growing your own food too, right?
I think any time that anyone creates something that they're proud of enough to bring other people to see it or experience it, that's a pretty good endorsement of their own work. And obviously that's a good marketing process for them as well, to bring prospective clients around and give them lots of wine.
Exactly.
Awesome. Hey, well, thank you very much, as always, Mary and Ilka. Really appreciated that. Zach, we got any notices?
We sure do. So, of course, we're doing at the Accelerator every Wednesday, our time. So Thursday for you down under, we've got our Passive House Accelerator live programming underway. So some great sessions have already happened this fall, and many more to come. So you can check the website, passivehouseaccelerator.com, for that info. We also want to make sure that everyone is aware of the FIASCon 2023 conference that is happening in Houston. And I think all four of us are going to be there. We're really excited, Matthew, to see you again in North America. So we'll include a link to the registration page in the show notes for that. And also, we are busy doing new videos every week on the Reimagine Buildings channel. So if you haven't checked that out, please do so. We've got some great stuff up there.
Absolutely. Awesome. So check that out. You can find links to all of that at passivehouseaccelerator.com. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll be back again next week on Passive House Podcast.